Health and Wellness, which is sponsored by the Florida Bar's Special Committee on Mental Health and Wellness of Florida Lawyers. I'd like to introduce our distinguished panel of very accomplished professionals who are going to guide us through this presentation today. Our good friend Joe Ankes, who's really been my principal contact with the group, and very happy to oblige his request that we host and provide the facility here today. Dr. Raul Mehra, Judge Stephen Leifman, who's obviously one of the great leaders in the field, and Judge Nicotine Addiction. Thank you all for coming here very much and being here. We're really happy to be participating on what is clearly designated as a very important forward-looking program of the Florida Bar. I introduce myself as chairman of the firm. I get to say that for 6 more days, at which time I will be chair emeritus. Let me take the opportunity to introduce you to my successor, David Spector, who will be taking over the reins on February 1. So David, congratulations. Thank you for that little bit of commercial, and now I'm going to turn it over to Joe and enjoy the program.
Thank you. Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Technology is working. Andrew, thank you for the warm welcome. As you know, it's sincerely appreciated, and a sincere, true, heartfelt thanks to Ackerman for their generosity and support. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our CLE. I am Joe Ankes, and I will be moderating this session. I'm grateful to be here today. This is an essential topic, and unfortunately, Regine Diamond, who was going to be on our panel, poor Regine got struck with the flu, which, as you know, is going around. And we are honored to have Judge Nicotine join us today in Regine's place, and we wish her a speedy recovery. Just a reminder for everybody, please turn off your cell phones or put them on silent mode. You're not going to want to miss this discussion. And generally speaking, this CLE is part of the Florida Bar's Special Committee on Mental Health and Wellness. It's part of our 2018 initiative. And the members, some of you may know them, is our chairperson, Dory Foster Morales, Benjamin Gibson, the Honorable Stephen Leifman, Dr. Raul Mehra, the Honorable Nushin Saifi, Carl Schwait, Christine Bilbrey, and myself. And I can say on behalf of the committee, it's been a privilege and an honor to work with them. They helped tremendously to make this event possible. Also, on behalf of the special committee, I want to thank President Michael Heiger of the Florida Bar. I want to thank the entire 105,000 members of the Florida Bar, all my special committee members, Veritext in the back doing an excellent job on complimentary videography services, and again, to our most gracious host, Ackerman, for their incredible support and encouragement. So before we get started, let's give our panel, our host, and yourselves a big round of applause for making this CLE possible. And let's get started. So what I'm going to do, let me just break this down. I'm going to do everything in my power to just be a moderator. I am not going to be a panelist. So in that role, what I'm going to do is introduce you to all of our panelists, give you a brief biographical sketch of each one. They're all accomplished. I could spend an hour on each one of them, but I won't. And then each of them is going to give you a brief 3-minute overview as to what they're going to cover today. And then I'm going to start with Dr. Mehra, allow him to share his insights. Then I'm going to proceed to Judge Leifman, allow Judge Leifman to share his insights. And then I'm going to speak with Judge Saifi and allow her to share her insights. Then we're going to have Q&A for, depending on the time we have remaining, a little bit of time remaining. Possibly Judge Leifman may lead us through an exercise if we have time. And at the end, please make sure you get a handout which has valuable information and resources. And for those of you who want your CLE credit, I have the CLE confirmation number, but you can't have it now. Okay. The session will last approximately 90 minutes. So let's get started. To my right is Dr. Raul Mehra. And Dr. Mehra is the CEO and Chief Medical Officer of Mera Vista Health, a Florida-based national healthcare organization focused on improving human performance at work, at home, at school, and in athletics. Clients include corporations, not-for-profits, academic institutions, and families. Dr. Mehra is board certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology in Child, Adolescent, and Adult Psychiatry. He is also a former assistant professor of psychiatry at USF Morsani College of Medicine in Tampa. He earned his bachelor's in biology from the College of Charleston and his medical degree from the Medical University of South Carolina. He completed his fellowship in child and adolescent psychiatry at University of South Florida, Morsani, and he has worked and extensively volunteered in local and statewide foster care systems and the issues related thereto. Dr. Mehra and Kathy have 2 daughters, a son-in-law and a granddaughter. He is a native of India and grew up in Gaffney, South Carolina. And if anybody is a House of Cards fan, you will know that Gaffney holds a special place in Dr. Mehra's heart. His passions are his family, international traveling, cooking, and exercise, and we are honored to have him with us here today. To Dr. Mehra's right is the Honorable Nushin Saifi. Judge Saifi was appointed to the Circuit Court by Governor Christ in 2007, and she currently serves in the Criminal Division, where she has presided over 80 felony jury trials, including a death penalty case. She was appointed Associate Administrative Judge of the Division in July 2011 and Administrative Judge in March of 2013. She is also currently presiding over the Felony Mental Health Diversion Court and is one of the founders of Miami's first Veterans Court. Prior to her service on the bench, Judge Saifi was an assistant public defender in Miami beginning in July 1994. She tried over 75 cases as an attorney, including homicide and death penalty cases, and she trained and supervised lawyers in the felony division. Judge Saifi has served on the board of Casa Valentina since 2006, an organization that provides housing and support for young people aging out of foster care. From 2010 to 2012, she served on the board of the Melissa Institute for Violence Prevention and Treatment and continues to serve as an honorary board member. She also serves on the Dade Miami Criminal Justice Council as the Chief Judge's designee and chairs its main subcommittee, the Public Safety Coordinating Council. In 2016, Judge Saifi was named a Woman of Impact by the Miami-Dade Women's History Coalition. She also received the Paul Kaminsky Commitment to Justice Award at the annual Mental Health Conference of the 11th Judicial Circuit. In March 2017, she received one of the annual In the Company of Women awards given by the Miami-Dade County Parks and Recreation Department. In May 2017, she was also honored by Transition Inc. for her commitment and support of re-entry programs. Judge Saifi received her Juris Doctorate degree from Fordham University in 1993, and in 1990 she graduated from Georgetown University with a degree in English. As a Connecticut native, she now lives in Miami with her 3 children, and we again are honored to have her participation. And to Judge Saifi's right is Judge Stephen Leifman. Judge Leifman is the Associate Administrative Judge of the Miami-Dade County Court Criminal Division. From 2007 to 2010, Miami-Dade County Court Judge Steve Leifman served as Special Advisor on Criminal Justice and Mental Health for the Florida Supreme Court. He also chairs the Florida Supreme Court's Task Force on Substance Abuse and Mental Health Issues in the Court, as well as the Mental Health Committee for the 11th Judicial Circuit of Florida. Judge Leifman received the 2015 William H. Rehnquist Award for Judicial Excellence. This is one of the nation's highest judicial honors presented by Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court's John Roberts, Jr. This award is presented annually to a state court judge who exemplifies judicial excellence, integrity, fairness, and professional ethics. Judge Leifman is also the first recipient to receive the Florida Supreme Court Chief Justice Award for Judicial Excellence, and that was in 2015. Most recently, Judge Leifman was honored by the 2016 Governing Magazine Public Official of the Year. This is one of 8 honorees. The award recognizes governmental leaders who exemplify the ideals of public service. Judge Leifman has been featured in many national and local television programs, radio programs, and articles regarding mental health and the criminal justice system, including the New England Journal of Medicine, the Atlantic Magazine, CBS News, USA Today, Anderson Cooper, CNN, Special Investigations Unit, The Criminally Insane, NBC Nightly News, PBS, NPR, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, there's more, Governing Magazine, The Samantha Bee Show on TBS, CBS 4, I know, right? You ready? Steve, you want me to stop, right? WPLG, and WPBT. It's suffice it to say, you have a panel here today comprised of experts, not only substantively, but they are emotionally invested all into this topic. So we're going to get started now. with some of the nuts and bolts. So, Dr. Mehra, can you spend just a couple minutes telling everybody about what you want to cover today? And let me give you your microphone. Oh, sorry. Put that on there.
One reason why I wasn't a surgeon.
Try that.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and an honor to be here. Absolutely, Joe, thank you for having me. And thank you also to Mr. Michael Heiger, who's spearheaded this topic and issue, along with Doria Foster Morales, who's taken the leadership for our committee. It certainly is a very difficult topic, and we hope to this afternoon be able to kind of help you all move the needle a little bit in terms of your understanding of the challenges that exist and ways to kind of improve one's own emotional health ultimately. Part of the biography that Joe read that did not include, I wanted to share with y'all just some personal elements, because I think it's, when we're having such intimate conversations about a topic, it's important to understand what one's framework is. As Joe indicated, I was actually born in India, and we immigrated here when I was 5 to the Deep South in Gaffney, South Carolina. An incredible experience it was. But one of the challenges that arose was that my mother suffered from psychiatric illness for the large part of her adult life. And it was related to some things that had happened back in India. And while when I was in medical school, it wasn't necessarily that I was consciously trying to decide that I was going to go into psychiatry because of her illness. You know, very often the decisions that we make are rooted in our unconscious mind. But in retrospect, when looking back on it, it was very directly related to her illness, as well as some other folks in my life at that point in time. And so when I started my current organization, Mira Vista Health, about 11 years ago, and we formulated the vision for it, I'm very much a very simple thinker about things. And so the challenges that exist in my mind as a reference to what I experienced with my mom growing up as a child, again in Gaffney, South Carolina, was a population of about 15,000 at the time. And even right now in my hometown, there still is no psychiatrist, as is there is no psychiatrist in the majority of the counties in the state of Florida and things. So one of the 3 areas that are the pillars that I'm going to talk about this afternoon is, number 1, stigma. Number 2 is awareness to the topic, and number 3 is access. Because all 3 of these areas were something, when I reflected back in adulthood based on my mom's experience, were the 3 major challenges that existed. And those are the same challenges, I believe, that exist now as we're continuing to talk about the topic. The sheer fact that we're even having the conversation this afternoon is helping remove that stigma.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mehra. Nushin.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, even though I'm your pinch hitter. I have to point out also that a couple things. 2 things that Joe pointed out in my bio would not exist in my bio if it wasn't for Judge Leifman. One being one of the awards that I got, which was an award that was created by Judge Leifman, the Paul Kaminsky Award, and the other being the Felony Mental Health Diversion Court that I currently preside over, was a creation of Judge Leifman. And actually me sitting on our committee, the bar committee, I wouldn't even have anything on my resume that would, call for Dory Morales to put me on the committee if it wasn't for Judge Leifman. So thank you, Steve.
Or should I apologize?
Yeah, actually, yeah. There are moments where, yes, there are moments where I'd be cursing you out. So my resume, I guess, as it relates to mental health, is largely dealing with people in criminal court, defendants. But I think today, sort of following up on what Raul's talking about, I feel like I'm here and with what our committee's dealing with, to be sort of a living, breathing destigmatization of what we all deal with as lawyers in the real world, and what our committee is, I think, trying to do. And I think as it relates to all of you, I'm sure many of you knew Richard Sharpstein, and I think that our committee was created in part by what happened with Richard, by what happened recently with Irvin Gonzalez, and just a recognition that not just in the legal field, but in fields in general, but definitely in the legal field, there's a lot of pressure. So obviously at certain extremes, you've got people with diagnosable, definitely difficult mental health issues. But sort of on a day-to-day basis in the legal profession, there is stress, there is pressure, there is a desire to, you know, satisfy your clients and operate at a level where you're going to make money and do well, and you know, not let people know that you're suffering or failing or, you know, struggling. And I want to sort of add the wrinkle that, you know, for women, I think women in the field now, definitely in Miami, but probably nationwide, I know in law schools, are 50% or more. On the bench in Miami, I think our bench now is 50% or more. I'd like to believe that anything that I speak to when it comes to work-life balance as a woman, I think there are men out there now that share that same struggle, but let's face it, I still think it's something that women deal with a little bit more than men. And I think that that is something that I'll be touching on more today. So with that, and I'm happy to be here. And
We're honored to have you. Steve? Sure. Judge Leibman?
Thank you all so much. Joe, thank you for helping put this together, and my colleagues on the panel, and the bar, and Ackerman, thank you so much for hosting us. But I also want to thank all of you in the room. I suppose if we did this 10 years ago, there'd be about 5 people. And I think that's part of what's happening in our society, that there's finally a recognition that these issues touch everybody. In fact, we had a bar meeting in Orlando this weekend, and Mike Heiger, the president, said that in a recent poll, 33% of all lawyers are dealing with mental health or substance use issues, and 70% of all lawyers, when asked, said if they had a choice to pick another profession, they would have. That's a really daunting statistic. And for me, and I'm going to touch upon a few of these types of issues as well, but when I became a judge, I didn't realize I was becoming, and Judge Safey was becoming, the gatekeeper to Florida's largest psychiatric facility, and that's the Dade County Jail. You know, as we sit here this morning, you know, the United States is 5% of the world's population. We have 25% of the world's inmates. 1 out of 104 adults in the United States are behind bars. 1 out of 33 adults in the United States are under correctional supervision. And as you peel back and you look at why that is, what you will find is that almost all of it is due to either untreated mental illness or untreated substance use. But it's a little deeper than that, because there are a lot of social determinatives that are affecting people's mental illness that's pushing them into this criminal justice system. Our counties right now are spending over $80 billion a year on correctional costs, and our states are spending another $70 billion on correctional costs. It's gotten so bad, and it wasn't always this way, by the way. It's mostly happened since 1980. But it's gotten so bad that our counties are now deciding, should I build a new school or a new jail? Should I build a new hospital or a new jail? Should I pave a road and put in infrastructure or build a new jail? And those are horrible choices. And so there's a recognition, I think, among all of us that we need to start taking a different look and change the way that we are doing things. And this affects the law, it affects lawyers, it affects the court system, how we are responding to these issues. So I really welcome the opportunity to have this dialogue today, talk to you about some of the really innovative things that are going on. Judge Safey gives me way too much credit. She's done a remarkable job on handling these issues on the felony side for us. And there's really some great, exciting things, because a lot of the data I'm going to give you when I start my presentation is really depressing. But at the end of the presentation, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic. And it's a reflection of how we're starting to understand these illnesses, and they are illnesses, they are not an illness. And they affect different people differently, and there are a lot of treatments for them. And I would say that the good news for all of this is that people that do have to deal with serious mental illness, recovery rates are better for people with mental illnesses than people for heart disease and diabetes. These are not terminal illnesses. And people with mental illnesses are no more dangerous than the general population. In fact, on medication, they're much less dangerous than the general population. So I'm starting to think, doctor, we should put it in the water like fluoride. We'd have a much calmer society. And there's a lot of good things happening. So we're looking forward to talking about it, engaging you, and getting your feedback, and also getting your help on how we move forward. So thank you.
Sure. Thank you again for being here. So we're going to turn this over now. We're going to talk to Dr. Mehra a little bit. Lead us on kind of a discussion, Dr. Mehra, about the destigmatization, raising awareness of some of the key mental health statistics that we should be aware of, and tips to proper access. Dr. Mehra is an expert on access to service as well, in addition to substantively knowing about psychiatric issues. But I know destigmatization is something that the committee is very focused on. Frankly, we're just tired of not talking about it. We're tired of the silence. It's got to stop, and we're going to stop it right now. So let's start with destigmatization and segue into the other important topics.
Sure. So if you all take a minute and you think to yourselves, why is it so stigmatized? And so there's obviously a lot of different reasons. It's sometimes perceived as a weakness to ask for help. It's stereotypes that we see on TV. I jokingly say that I've chosen a profession that's actually more stigmatized than the actual illness is, because let me tell y'all, walking into a room at a cocktail party and telling people you're a psychiatrist, the room scatters. And so, no, and I don't read minds. But let's more closely examine the issue of stigma. If I ask people in this room to raise their hand and say, how many of you know someone with the Zika virus? Right? One. Okay. Usually that happens, the branding of it happens more during summertime. And I use that analogy because while this is taking nothing away from the impact of the Zika virus and the profound effect that it can have on an unborn fetus, is this issue. If I said to you that there is something that's out there that is way more infectious and way more deadly than the Zika virus could ever be, you would probably want to know what that is. And that would be stress. And stress kills. And stress is alive and well. And the profound impact that it has not only on our emotional health, but on our physical health as well. For too long in Western medicine, we have been siloing both of those things into our body compared to our mind. But the interplay between that is profound. And I cannot use that word enough, profound. With that, some of my comments this afternoon are intended to be focusing on prevention. Yeah, when you look at emotional health, it runs the gamut of someone dealing like we all deal with emotional health. Someone may have a bona fide diagnosis of a major depression, alcoholism, or on the extreme end, a diagnosis of schizophrenia. I want to limit my thoughts here to the beginning part of the spectrum in the way of getting y'all to kind of think about prevention. Prevention for yourselves, your families, for your firms, your neighbors, and what can we all do? Because without these conversations, this is a topic that's not going to go away, and it's only, frankly, and I'm not trying to be a pessimist because I'm not, but the need is going through the roof for especially with children, is going through the roof. So what do we do to begin the destigmatization of it? We start off immediately with having conversations like we're having. We create a forum in our places of worship, whatever they may be, and asking questions. Because, it's okay that, academic centers, schools will do fundraisers for different types of physical illnesses. But when really is the last time you've seen a fundraiser or the NFL wearing bracelets to support suicide prevention, right? That's one of the points about awareness, that there are approximately 40,000 mostly women who die from breast cancer every year in our country. There are some men who die from breast cancer as well. This is taking nothing away from breast cancer. There's an equal number of people that die from suicide. I am in the business of trying to prevent and mitigate that from happening, both in children, adolescents, and adults. And so I cannot stress that point enough. So that's some thoughts about the stigma issue. Is having that conversation. It doesn't mean you need to be a therapist or a counselor. It is asking someone how they're doing, what's going on. Because, it's human nature. People actually want to talk about themselves. They sometimes just need to be given the permission to do so. And especially people you're working with. I can respectfully say to y'all that as a physician, the numbers out there for us are about 400 physicians a year in our country commit suicide. And I will tell you that is a low number. Suicide goes unreported And undocumented is suicide. Frequently when there's accidents or an overdose, it'll be labeled as an accidental overdose. Someone has a car accident when they run their car off the road and they die. Frequently plane crashes, suicide. So we never really know the exact amount, but if on the lower side of things, if 400 physicians, that's the equivalent to either 1 or 2 medical school classes, we've got a serious problem on our hands. If physicians are, because of the challenge that exists in healthcare, which are similar to the challenges that y'all have, we really have an issue that we need to try to address and figure out some solutions to. So the issue of access, Joe, you mentioned. Here's my bias, because this is something that frankly my company works on and helps employer groups with, is the access issue. When someone has made the decision that they want to seek some treatment, and I am not here to try to wave the mental health flag and say that everybody needs mental health care and everybody needs therapy. That's not my intent. My intent is increase your awareness and understanding. There is no one size fits all. What are your solutions for yourself and for your family that you come up with to put a brake on this stress and capture how to be happy, right? Because we need to reframe this conversation. Is that I got a call driving up here. One of the ways we market is through group health insurance brokers, and he wanted us to lead a seminar on stress management and burnout. I have to tell you, I'm burnt out on the word burnout, right? Let's look at how do we be happy? I mean, because who doesn't want to be happy, right? I would imagine you all do. You want your children to be happy. You want your parents to be happy. You want to be happy. How do we make that happen? And it's really, frankly, not as complicated as we all think it is, but it is stopping and becoming aware of it. Taking that momentary mindfulness, that word is used a lot. The bar is using it a lot. It's great. It's just another word that means quieting your mind. Meditation, prayer. Being Indian, we've kind of been sitting on top of mountaintops for about 5,000 years, and stuff, and practicing mindfulness. But it is something that think to yourself. It doesn't mean you need to go out and buy a tape or go sign up for a fancy class. It means when you maybe get up in the morning, when you go home, is taking 5 minutes by yourself without that thing that we all know and love, right? Because this is the new religion in town. And in the 70s and 80s and 90s, it was nicotine addiction, smoking, and smoking still kills. This is the new addiction we have. And this is ruining, and yes, I will go on tape and say this is ruining the emotional health, especially of our children. Why? 2 main reasons. It is impairing their ability and even our own abilities to engage in meaningful social relationships. What we don't talk about in healthcare, and I alluded to this earlier, is prevention. How do you mitigate those prisons getting full? You offer treatment and awareness early on. Easier said than done. There's a lot of policy issues related to that. We're not going to get into all of that. But it is also about social relationships, because social relationships, how we engage with each other, are protective factors for our emotional well-being. And when we start losing those social connections, meaningful social connections, not the one where you're sending an emoji because a colleague got a raise, call them up and say, wow, Joe, congratulations, you got a new client. That is wonderful, right? But we're reducing ourselves to these sound bites, and these sound bites aren't going to cut it. The challenge with access is this: when someone does finally make that decision to seek help, what's happening in the treatment, and the judges here will know this, on behalf of the network insurance providers, does not matter who you have, is the network of providers on insurance plans are decreasing. And the reason they're decreasing is because of reimbursement rates to the providers. There's probably, in Hillsborough County where I live, is that if you have a child and you want them to get in, you can be paying cash to get in to see a child psychiatrist. Is going to be about a 3-month wait to do that. So if you're thinking of what I said earlier about prevention, we have to come up with solutions that help mitigate the long-term consequences of things. Let me share one more fact with you, and that's this, is that when someone in adulthood manifest themselves with a psychiatric condition, a bona fide psychiatric condition. Remember, I talked about the little continuum earlier. We're now talking about major depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, or substance abuse. When someone manifests that self in adulthood, 50% of the time, 50, by age 14, they have started manifesting symptoms. And by age 24, it is 80 to 90% that they've started manifesting the symptoms. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because of prevention. Depression is no different than if you've got cancer on your skin and you've got a malignant melanoma and you let that thing sit there for a year, it's going to metastasize, correct, if you don't get treatment? Well, major depression is no different. The longer it goes untreated and unaddressed, the more refractory it becomes to treatment. And that's the challenge. Y'all can tell, because I keep focusing on children, that I'm a child psychiatrist at my core. And the reason that for those 14 and younger, that the reason we're not able to get them help sooner is for the reasons I've already identified: stigma, awareness, and access. So those are the points that I wanted to kind of stress.
Really, really appreciate that, Dr. Mehra. It's sobering that we have become chained, and it's true. Judge Safey, Nushin, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you wanted to discuss today, which was balancing work and life, the need to have a support network, whether it be a friend, a family, a colleague, or a professional. A concept that she and I discussed: nobody is perfect, and just to be honest about our humanity, and that mistakes do happen. And if you're willing to share some real life examples that you have seen in your professional life in the courtroom, actually, where attorneys have perhaps had less than a stellar day, and how you may have intervened and kind of helped them out, that would be great.
Okay. All right, so I'm about to turn 50. I can admit that out loud next week. And I think that sort of makes you pause and look back and, see where you came from and see where you're at and take stock. And part of, one of the biggest things that came up at our bar meeting last week was the concept of gratitude, and I'm happy to report that I'm at a place in my life where I can be very grateful. And one of the things that I am most grateful for is that in the last, 24 years as a lawyer and as a judge, I've really been lucky that as much as I didn't have, role models as women role models growing up as a lawyer, I did have peers. And those peers, as I look back now, are realizing that at the moments of my life that were tough, where I struggled as a lawyer, as a mother, as a wife, I had these peers that were sort of by my side that made me feel like it was okay, that, maybe you're floundering, but somebody next to you is also floundering, so you're not doing so badly. And I realized how important it was. And looking back now, I realize that I'm here today in large part, not just because of my family, but in large part because of, a couple of really crucial friends. And I also realized that I was lucky that, these couple of friends that I've had were also people that were always honest with me, that I could be honest with. And I realized that, and I guess I'm speaking predominantly, I'm glad there's a lot of women in the room, and I think you'll all know what I'm talking about. I don't know if men do this as much, I haven't seen it. But I think women, we do tend to want to not just be perfect, but sometimes act like everything is perfect. And even if we don't do it, there are women around us who, oh, how are you? Oh, everything's great. How are the kids? Oh, my kids are great. And then you tend to walk away from those women feeling like, wow, my life sucks and my kids sucked. And this year, I'm sure there's some women in this room who will understand. Years and years ago, I started sending out Christmas cards because, when you're the perfect woman and perfect mother, that's what you do at Christmas time. You send out the holiday card with your perfect looking family on the holiday card. And my friends to this day make fun of me because I'm famous for the fail. One year my Christmas card was my kids in Halloween costumes because I could not get a good picture of 3 kids, and it wasn't even a good Halloween picture. So every year, this year it was my kids, and the lighting was terrible. My kids are grown now, and I still can't do it right. And this year, the Christmas card went out, after Christmas. I'm happy to report it got out before 2018. But, and even now, I'm about to turn 50 years old, I said to myself, the big box of cards with the Shutterfly, logo on it, stared at me. And my daughter's 19, and I looked at her and I said, don't do this to yourself. You know, even as I was doing, I said to her, don't do this to yourself. Because I look at that box, and that box, even now that I'm somebody involved in all that, is to me a box of shame. And I have a mom. My mom's a doctor, retired doctor, and she says to me, "Why do you do this to yourself?" And that's probably the last vestige of, you know, of I guess perfection or guilt or whatever that I do to myself. And then again, maybe I'll still keep doing it. I don't know. And one day maybe I'll have that perfect card. I worry a little bit about younger women because now, what Raul was saying about social media, and I read an article about how this generation is becoming so lonely, even though they have, you know, 4,000 friends, because there is this perfection out there. And I do think, I hate to say it, I do think women do it a little bit more than men do. So I think it's really important for all of us, but I'm speaking again to the women out there, to be honest. I don't think it's wrong to be honest. And I will tell you all out here, you know, again, women more than men, on a daily basis it is a struggle. I think we can try to have it all, but on any given day you're not going to have it all. Working and having children and working and just balancing all there is to balance in life is not easy. I think you should keep doing it. I don't regret working for a minute. I think it's really important to continue to work, but I do think that early on in life, we should encourage those younger than us, and I think that it's important to have outlets. So for me, obviously, I think friendships are important. One of the things that I say to people in mental health court as they're graduating, which means that they've been successful in our court for a year, sometimes more, sometimes a little bit less, and I try to, you know, make it universal. I say to them, look, at some point in your life, we all need extra support, extra help from time to time. Now that you've graduated, make sure you get that extra help, extra support, whatever you need. And these are people, obviously, who are typically on psychotropic medication. A lot of them have substance abuse issues. But I mean that. And I think that it's important to know at any stage of your life to be self-aware and know that maybe today all I need is, you know, a couple hours of a break. Maybe tomorrow what I need is, you know, exercise. But there might be time in your life where you need professional help. And I think that there's nothing wrong with getting therapy. I'm the first person to admit, like, I've done it, you know. And at our meeting last week, our meetings now become like everyone sort of telling their anecdotal stories. And I think last week I was one who said, like, doesn't everyone go from time to time? And I want my children to understand that the same way we exercise, that we go to the doctor, like, that is something that's in your toolbox. And I think that that's something that I want people to understand and find that it is not stigmatizing. And the way I tell people about it is, if you're speaking to somebody who's neutral, it's really the only time in your life that you're talking to someone who's there for you and neutral, and their job is really just to listen to you sort of unload. And they're there and neutral, and you kind of have to also listen to what they have to say and sort of take their judgment. And it's, you know, it's not your mom, it's not your friend, it's not someone that you're going to combat with either. And it just, for that reason, and for what it's worth, every single person in my life who doesn't go, who I tell, you know, you should go and talk to someone, they say, you know, come back to me and, whoa, what is that person going to tell me? Everyone who's never gone to therapy seems to think that they're going to walk in and get an answer and walk out, and it's not like that. It's about, I think, just sort of what I also say is sort of speaking your unspeakable. We all have stuff that we want to say, or that we need to let out, and you can't always let out what you want to let out to even your closest of friends or your family members. And if you don't let that stuff out, the one thing I've noticed as I turn 50 is, and you'll see this with people who are, you know, near you and near and dear to you, people who have baggage, you don't let that baggage out, by the time you're hitting midlife, man, that stuff is going to explode. And that's the stuff that I see happening with people around me who, you know, aren't letting that stuff out. You either get really, really happy and healthy at this stage of life, or it goes the other way. So you need to speak your unspeakable. If you can't speak that unspeakable to someone close to you, then you need to go somewhere where you can. And so I guess that's what I feel like my role is, I think, here. I think I've learned so much, not just from seeing people in court, but from the people around me who are living really positive lives. At different stages of your life, you have to figure out what's working for you and be honest with yourself. And again, like I said, you have to have different, I think, methods of coping and figure out at a different time in your life what that is. And I think it's important, definitely in our profession, because it is a high-pressured profession. It's a profession where you're definitely trying to do your best for your clients. I have to believe that in a place this beautiful, where you're serving food, I think that's definitely a starting off point. And again, in a place where there was a loss that was suffered, that you're cognizant of giving people outlets and giving people an opportunity to, take the time they need to sort of unload and take care of their mental health. But that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Quick follow-up, Nusha. Thank you so much for that. Tell us a little bit about, and Steve can also amplify this too, from the perspective of being a judge, what is the court's tolerance, understanding, empathy towards attorneys that are apparently going through something? Both of you can feel free to chime in, but should attorneys be afraid of going to court if they are impaired? Should attorneys be afraid of making a mistake in front of the court? Give us some kind of guidance that the court is compassionate relative to being a punitive type of venue for people. Because some attorneys get very nervous about making mistakes, which may lead them to substance abuse and appearing in front of you on a matter. Can you elaborate on that a little bit in any way, shape, or form?
You should not go to court impaired.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
let me strike that. We know you shouldn't go to court.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I was just kidding. I think that at least I will say we both work in criminal court, and our entire career has been in criminal court. I will say criminal is very forgiving and very tolerant. And I would say I think the bar overall, given that we all self-police, I think especially when it comes to substance abuse, and what we were saying last week in our meeting is we're hoping that the idea that as far as mental health stuff, I think it's going to catch up too, that we're pretty forgiving and tolerant. I think that when these issues come to light, the idea is to get an attorney help and do everything we can to help them maintain their license and maintain everything.
Have you ever had attorneys approach you sidebar and say, Judge, it's not a good day for you right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then there's been other times where, I'm sure Steve's had similar experiences where we've approached attorneys and say, listen, maybe you need to take some time.
Something's going on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that. And Judge Leifman.
Thank you. And thank you again. It was interesting listening to my colleagues, and I was thinking that what a sad commentary on our system of mental health. The largest practice of psychiatry in Miami-Dade is in the jail. We have 13 full-time psychiatrists and another 6 or 7 part-time psychiatrists. And I tell you this because Joe was like, this is going to be more of a civil lawyer crowd, so don't kill them with all your criminal justice stuff. But those are just people who didn't get the kind of care they needed. It could be any one of us that ended up in our system because the system is so painfully fragmented, under-resourced, and difficult to access. So my journey into this mental health world actually began one morning when I was getting ready to go on the bench. And I was approached by the assistant public defender and the assistant state attorney. And they said, there's a couple here, their son is in jail on a case you're about to hear, and we really think you need to talk to them. And at the time I was handling what we call the misdemeanor jail division. And so those are misdemeanors that are still in custody. And there's 3 kinds of people in that division. There are those with attached felonies who are not allowed out. There are those that are just too poor to bond out. And then there are those with mental illnesses that have no clue on how to get out. And so this lovely couple, very sophisticated, they looked fairly wealthy, came into my chambers, and they were really distraught. The mom was crying, the dad was shaking, and they started to tell me about their son. They told me he was brilliant, he had gone to Harvard, he had a late onset of schizophrenia, he was having these ideations of religiosity, which is often common with people with a schizoaffective disorder. He didn't show up to work one day. He cashed in his life insurance policy. He got on an airplane and he went to Israel to be closer to God. And within 2 weeks, the Israelis had deported him back to Miami because he was committing quality of life offenses. And I was pretty new at the time. This was in 2000, and I was a relatively new judge. And I think when you're a relatively new judge, you think you have a lot more wisdom and a lot more power than you really do. And I made the mistake of promising them that I would get their son help, because I knew nothing about the mental health system or mental health. But I just assumed, since we deal in logic, that if you got arrested and you had a mental health disorder, there must be some system of care for you, because if you got arrested and had a heart attack, we clearly had a health care system for you. So I made this wonderful promise, told them I was going to save their son, and we were all going to live happily ever after. As I started to go back into the courtroom, the mom stopped me and she said, "Judge, there's one more thing I need to tell you about my son." She said, "Not only is he brilliant, but respectfully, he probably knows more about the mental health system than you do." And I was kind of confused, and I said, "Excuse me?" And she said, well, you see, my son is the former head of psychiatry at Jackson Memorial Hospital. This was a Harvard-educated psychiatrist who had a late onset of schizophrenia. So this isn't about criminal justice. It's about an illness that we're not treating and allowing people to move into our system. And the story gets a lot worse. I went into the courtroom, I called his case. He was in on some ridiculous charge. I don't even think it was a statutory offense. It was a local county ordinance that a lot of homeless people get picked up on. And we started talking, and he was funny and charming, and no offense, but he was more respectful than the lawyers that day. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh man, maybe there's something wrong with his folks. He seems pretty good to me. What do I know? Except he looked like a homeless guy that hadn't bathed for a few weeks. And I said to him, look, you keep insisting there's nothing wrong with you. I really don't want you to be in jail any longer than you've already been, because I agree this charge is kind of silly. I said, but I don't understand one thing. You keep telling me there's nothing wrong with you, but why would a Harvard-educated psychiatrist be in jail and recycling through our system if you didn't have some type of mental health disorder? And I didn't realize at the time, but my ignorant words created a full-blown psychotic episode. He started screaming at the top of his lungs. He started pointing to his parents. He started telling us that the people in the courtroom were from the CIA and they came to kill him, and his real parents had died in the Holocaust. And the only thing I had been taught to do is, when someone acts that way, order a psychological evaluation. So I ordered a bunch of evaluations for a lot of your money. He spent another 8 to 10 weeks on possession of a dairy cart in a Dade County jail. All 3 evaluations came back and said that he was incompetent to proceed, and he met criteria for involuntary hospitalization. This is great, I'm thinking. I'm going to be the hero. I'm going to get the guy the help I thought I could get him. And then I found out, as I began to order him into hospitalization, that the public defender kindly pointed out that I had no jurisdiction to do anything because I was only a county court judge. And that my only option was to release him back to the street, floridly psychotic, and tell him to go see a doctor, which is exactly what he told me I needed to do on the day I met him. And I don't think any of us become professionals to be part of that kind of system. Now that was almost 18 years ago. It was 18 years ago in January that happened. And I don't know if he's dead or alive. He disappeared from the face of the earth. I was out in California giving a speech, and someone came up to me and I told the story, and they said, we think he's out here. And that's what happens to people when we don't treat their illnesses. But I also learned 3 very, very valuable lessons. One is that Miami-Dade County actually has a very serious mental health crisis. We have the largest percentage of people with serious mental illnesses of any urban area in the United States. It's almost 2 to 3 times the national average. 9.1% of our general population, that's 192,000 adults and 55,000 children who live in our community, live and suffer with very serious mental illnesses. And because we live in Florida, where the emphasis is on the state's last 2 letters of the name, we're now 51st per capita in mental health funding. We're barely above Puerto Rico. And so what's happened is our jails end up becoming the largest facilities because that's the first access point of these illnesses, because people don't know how and where to access treatment. People in our jail stay 4 to 8 times longer than someone without a mental illness at 7 times the cost. We spend, it's hard to believe, I don't want to get it wrong because it's so stunning to me. We spend $400,000 a day to warehouse people in the Dade County Jail. It's $150 million a year wasted. And it's a hellhole. It's better now, thankfully, to a Justice Department lawsuit. And people are being treated humanely, but most of them don't even need to be there to begin with. And because we had done such a lousy job training the police on even how to handle these situations, up until the last few years, we've had 25 people with serious mental illnesses die during an encounter with a police officer because the police didn't know how to handle it, when the parents just called to get help because they didn't know what else to do. And so the second lesson, that was my first lesson. The second lesson I learned that morning was that this wasn't just a local problem, but it turns out to be a state and national one as well. But the third and the most difficult lesson is that our community mental health system is horribly antiquated. It's horribly under-resourced. It doesn't even reflect usually best practices, current medications, current practices, current research. And so people flounder through the system and end up in our system horribly and cruelly unnecessarily. And so the good news is we have established this wonderful Miami-Dade criminal justice mental health project that really has changed so many lives. We now have the largest trained squad of police officers in the United States in a program called Crisis Intervention Team Policing. So God forbid you have a friend or family member that needs the assistance of 911, be sure to ask for a CIT officer, Crisis Intervention Team Police Officer. They go through a 40-hour training program. They're taught how to identify a serious illness, how to de-escalate the situation, not to arrest, and where to take people. And can I tell you that police really deserve a lot of credit. We keep stats on every call Miami and Miami-Dade make. All 36 agencies are now trained, but the two largest do about 60 to 70% of the calls. Over the last 7 years, they handled 71,628 mental health calls, just those two agencies. But more impressively, they only made 138 arrests out of 71,628 calls. So what happened was the number of arrests in Dade County went from 118,000 a year to 56,000 this year. And thanks to Judge Safey and others in our profession and our colleagues, we also set up 3 post-arrest diversion programs. So if you get arrested on a misdemeanor in Dade County with a serious mental illness like that psychiatrist, instead of needlessly ordering all those silly evaluations, if it's a misdemeanor, within 3 days you're out of jail, you're sent to a crisis unit. We reset the case in 2 weeks because the Baker Act doesn't apply to us. And we actually get the person stabilized. We have a whole team of individuals that go see the people. We have 8 peers that work for the courts now. 3 or 4 of them graduated from our program. They had been arrested. They're in recovery. They're amazing human beings. They're able to work with this population. The county gave us a car. We get them housing. We get them clothes. We get them their benefits. We get them appointments. We take them to their appointments. And the recidivism rate among our misdemeanor population went from about 70% to 20%. It worked so well, we expanded it to the felony division. That program alone has saved the county 68 years of jail bed days over the last 5 years because the recidivism is down to about 30–35% right now. When it first started, it was probably 70 or 80%. And so it's working. We closed one of our local jails 6 years ago, saving the county $12 million a year. So we're making really great strides. We're in the process now of building the first of its kind in the country, a one-stop shop forensic diversion facility on 7th Avenue between 20th and 22nd Street. And that'll be a one-stop shop for the most acutely ill that keep recycling, not only for criminal justice, but also through the hospital system because they can't get what they need because there's nothing in our community that's available to them to really help them recover when they're that ill. But the other thing you need to know, these illnesses, and I don't want to step on the doctor's toe because I don't have an MD after my name, it's just a little JD. But these illnesses come about 2 ways. One is there's a genetic disposition, just like any other illness. And then there are triggers. Puberty is a trigger. Marijuana can be a trigger. And, we have this cluster of genes, and within this cluster is everything from ADHD to autism to schizophrenia-type disorders to bipolar and major depression. And what triggers them is interesting. It's something we really don't 100% know, and we don't even know there's no cure, but there are treatments to help the mind recover. The other way, and Dr. Mehra talked about it, is through trauma. And trauma is physiological. It's not an emotional reaction. So you have this little thing in your body called the Pituitary Gland, and it's your warning system. And if, say, you walked out to Biscayne Boulevard and saw a bus coming at you, your pituitary would send a little message to your adrenaline, and your adrenaline would release a chemical called cortisol, and it would tell you to get the heck out of the street. But if you can't get away, bless you, if you can't get out of the situation, the cortisone keeps firing. And it overdoses your brain, and it permanently alters your brain activity. And that's what PTSD is. That's a trauma psychosis. And the symptoms can be horrible. They can be like schizoaffective type disorders. And it's very, very difficult for people. And so 92% of all the women in jail in the United States with serious mental illnesses were sexually abused as children. They have severe, severe PTSD. They're victims. And it's usually familiar. It happens when they're 7, 8, 9 years old, totally innocent. It's usually someone in the household. It's not a stranger. It goes on for long periods of time. And that's, I think, part of this Me Too movement. People have just had it. It's sick. And our schools have done a horrible job identifying and screening for these traumas. In fact, the kid starts to act out. Instead of embracing a child that's been sexually abused, they put them in a class with bullies because they're acting out. And because it's a younger brain, it gets even more damage than an older brain from an overdose of cortisol. They become a mess. They turn to drugs, they turn to prostitution, and they end up in the criminal justice system for their entire adult lives when they were sexually abused as children. 75% of men who are in the criminal justice system have serious trauma issues as well. Some of it's sexual abuse, but a lot of it is living in a home with domestic violence or living in a neighborhood that's like a war zone. And that's the military side of things. And that's the other really interesting thing about our police program. Our coordinator that handles our police training gets 150 calls a month from police officers for their own personal mental health issues. They have severe PTSD. And talk about stigma, it's the last place in the world they want to go for help. So we've actually set up an alternative program of treatment for them outside their departments. And we think it explains why shootings of people with mental illnesses went from 1 a month to 5 or 6 in the last 8 years. Because they get it, and that's why they're doing such an amazing job. But real quickly, the other point I want to talk about is what the bar is starting to do. We have 2 pieces of the mental health committee. One is on the wellness side for lawyers, and the other is on the mental health side. So our committee that I'm working with, and I have a wonderful group as well, we're looking at ways to streamline the Baker Act and the Marchman Act, but we're also putting together a whole series of CLEs for lawyers on some of these issues, and not just for criminal justice. Paul Singerman, who some of you may know is a brilliant bankruptcy lawyer, just wrote a fascinating piece where he's had 6 clients over the last few years commit suicide. 6. So it affects family, it affects bankruptcy, it affects probate, it affects landlord-tenant, it affects juvenile and dependency, and it affects criminal. It's everywhere. And so we want to be able to educate lawyers on how to identify these issues, how to deal with these issues. We have set up nationally a wonderful program for judges where we're teaching judges nationally how to identify people in the courtroom with serious mental illnesses. And we developed this wonderful one-page, 2-sided laminated card that a judge keeps on the bench, and it helps us. And so when you ask, you know, it helps us identify lawyers as well, but we're really looking for defendants. But what we're going to do now is take that card and develop one for lawyers. And this really came out of the article that Paul wrote. But you know, maybe we should put counseling back in the practice of law. And maybe we should be able to take this card and give it to all of you to teach you how to recognize signs and symptoms of clients that you may have, and then give you resources on how to direct your clients into services. Why should we wait for them to get sicker? Why should we wait for them to be naked on Biscayne Boulevard because they're in a manic episode because the doctor gave them the wrong medication? And so there's a lot we can do as lawyers. And I think it's incumbent upon, and that's why I love lawyers, because you're active and you're thoughtful and you see the bigger side of things sometimes. And I think there's so many of us that we really can make a dent, not just in the practice of law, but I think it'll make you feel better in your practice. But you can also do a lot for your clients to help them get access to services. And I'm kind of hoping we overwhelm the system. Because if we overwhelm the system and make it even harder for people to get treatment, then maybe our legislators will wake up, and if we can get folks like you that actually golf with these people and give contributions to these people, we can get them to understand that we have to stop what we're doing. Because we have applied a criminal justice model to an illness, and no one should be shocked that it's failed. And until we apply a disease model or a population health model to this illness, we're never going to fix it. And it requires legislative action, really money, on all levels. And so my other hope is that not only will we help you feeling better in your own lives, helping identify your clients that need some help, But eventually, we'll get to the elected leaders and enlighten them that we just can't stay down this path because we are failing miserably. You know, there's that great ad for Cancer Centers of America. Have anybody ever seen that? You know, it's like, oh my God, you get cancer. We're going to take care of every aspect of your life, your mental health, your transportation. We're going to treat you like gold. We're going to use the best practices in the world to make you feel better. Mental health is the exact opposite. We're going to treat you like shit. We're going to give you the worst possible medication that's the cheapest available. We're going to put you in a facility that probably has roaches. And then we're going to ask, you know, and then when we discharge you, when your insurance runs out in about 4 days, when you act out in the street and you get arrested, we're going to punish you when we haven't even given you what you needed. If we, you know, and then my last thing, because I know I've used up a lot of time, but the one conclusion that I have drawn after doing this for almost 18 years now, that if we treated people with primary health, you all would be lined up suing the health industry and providers, and there would be criminal lawsuits for gross negligence. But for some reason, we have accepted this subpar, dangerous care that we provide in our society for people that are just sick. And I don't think we should take it anymore. And feel free to sue, because it is a mess. And I don't know how else to get the country's attention to stop it unless maybe we get them into court, because it's out of control. And there's no reason that Judge Safey and I should see more people with mental illness in a day than Dr. Mehra sees in a month. And so we're fixing it, we're making progress, but we need to enlist more help. So I'll stop there. I really appreciate y'all being here. Look, these are treatable illnesses. There's no reason we need to do this anymore. Thank you.
That was really inspirational, sobering, and you know, Judge Leifman speaks.
And I got to have my mental health moment, so thank you for letting me vent.
It was a little cathartic for Judge Leifman. There is no question that by everybody being here today, you've taken the first step to recognize that this is essential. The time has passed. We are here. We're going to turn it over to questions and answers, and you know, we encourage questions. Nothing is off limits. This is meant to be a vibrant discussion. It is being recorded in fairness, so everybody knows. We can wave to the videographer in the back, because the hope is that this will be put up on the Florida Bar website. So I want to give that admonition. Also, before we end today, for those of you that just came for that CLE credit and lunch, I will set aside my disappointment, but we have a handout which has a considerable amount of resource information. It's designed for you, it's designed for your family, it is designed for your clients, and the first thing across the top, which Judge Leifman helped me craft, was that whenever we find ourselves in a situation, if it is medical or a police, we call 911, okay? And as Steve has pointed out, if you are calling 911 for a mental wellness issue, ask for a crisis intervention team police officer. That may very well make the difference between a favorable outcome and a potentially tragic one. And I don't mean to overstate that, but is that accurate?
Very true.
Okay.
We've also trained all the 911 operators. So if there's any hint, they'll start asking questions. Does this involve someone with mental illness, so that they can make sure they dispatch a CIT officer. But it's even better if you know up front to immediately ask for it, and you're going to get a much better result. And they have done an amazing job.
And Steve, real quick, when did the CIT training start? How many years ago?
It started about 17 years ago.
About 17 years ago.
Yeah.
Was it a struggle to get that training implemented?
It was. What happened was we had a summit after this situation with the psychiatrists I described here in Miami, and we invited all the traditional and non-traditional stakeholders to literally map out how our criminal justice system intersected with the community mental health system. And what we really found is that we were embarrassingly dysfunctional. And we needed to do two things. We needed a pre-arrest diversion, and we needed post-arrest. And the pre-arrest was a program we found in Memphis, which was the CIT, and we wanted to train the police officers. So I actually went and started meeting with police chiefs because I was having some difficulty, and I went to Miami-Dade County, which is the largest department, and I met with the then director, And, you know, I got there, it was almost comical, and he said, you know, Judge, thanks for coming out. We did an analysis of all our 9/11 calls. And what we found is that last year, and I'm not exaggerating the story at all, last year, Judge, we only had 3 mental health calls in all of Miami-Dade County. And he was like patting me on the head, I felt. It was so condescending, it was unbelievable. And I said, well, Director, I really appreciate you doing that analysis, but most of these calls don't come in as a mental health call. They come in as loitering and prowling, possibly domestic violence, and I went through the whole list. Well, thank you, Judge, for coming. Well, I need to give Kathy Rundle-Fernandez and Don Horn a lot of credit because after a lot of media came out on these issues, they impaneled a grand jury to look into some of these issues. And in Dade County, we actually use our grand juries not just to indict people, but to look at major social issues. And they issued this amazing, amazing report. And they indicted the police for not doing CIT. And this director, who then ended up running for mayor and winning, was there right after the report came out. And to his credit, he really did a 180 and then helped us start to train his officers. So I'm not sure we would have ever gotten it done without the grand jury report guilting them into understanding that they were part of the problem.
But the moral of the story was action led to results.
And huge results.
Every one of you here, you know, and I'll ask Dr. Mehra again, and we will turn this over to Q&A. But Dr. Mehra, if somebody in this audience wants to help somebody that is going through a difficult time, most of us here are lay people. We are, you know, attorneys. What can we do just if somebody is having a problem? What is kind of the best tips you might have if somebody says, I am having a rough time? What would you think would be some advice lay people can deploy?
Sure. So there's 2 thoughts. One is just some practical points, is just being supportive, right? Because and that sounds corny to say, but I see this happen all the time, where in a conversation, friends will share, or you know, our clients will share a situation, and then I'll you know, where there's the individual is having a conversation with someone else, and the other person is clearly wanting to talk about something, and there is such a discomfort, right, with wanting to hear or understand. Oh, you know, I don't want to really know that. I hear that all the time. I don't really want to know that. So step 1 in tips is just raising your own awareness of where are you and where's your comfort level in being able to talk about this, right? Because the starting point for all of this is how comfortable are we with ourselves? How much have we accepted ourselves, our imperfections, right? Because that's the anxiety that's created when someone else is talking about their problems. You're feeling overwhelmed yourself. Man, I don't really want to hear somebody else's story. You know, so take your selfishness out of the equation. I'm going to help illustrate with a point. Last week, connected with a friend of mine, physician, 5 years ago, his wife, age 40, developed healthy athlete, non-smoker, developed lung cancer, age 40, 6 months, she's deceased. He's raising and has raised 4 kids under the age of 14 at the time. Now, physician, I said that, intermixed. A year or 2 later, his mother develops dementia. She now moves into the home. His mother-in-law also lives in the area. She is 86 now, and he's looking after her. Now, this is a single male with little to no family around. We all, you know, either if you've not gone through something like this yourself, you may know of someone that's gone through something like this. And so what is it about him? And I will tell you, if you walked in the room right now and you sat down with him, you would think, even though he is a psychiatrist, there are some normal psychiatrists out there, you know, he's somebody you'd want to go have a drink with, and he will come off as the most optimistic, humanistic person you will ever meet. And you think to yourself, well, how do we get to that point when someone goes through something like that? It's about resilience. Right? That's something we really haven't talked about today a whole lot, is our own individual resilience. What does that mean? The word resilience has to do when something external happens, are you able to bounce back and go back to the form that you were originally in? What determines resilience? There's 3 main things. and the judge alluded to it earlier. One is our biological genetic predisposition. That's not something we can really control. But what I term the psychosocial dimension of our being, we can control. Psychological, having to do with self-esteem, our perception of ourselves. Are we good people? What kind of messages are we sending ourselves? Constantly, are we the feelings of inadequacy? You know, you've got a case, you lost a case. It's no different than in the work that I do in treating patients. Is that how are we positively affirming ourselves? Social determinants of resiliency. Is that who are we surrounding ourselves with? The power of that, I've talked about that earlier, of those social relationships is profound. One of the other panelists earlier mentioned the term loneliness. Over the last 20 years, the number of square feet we have in our homes has increased. The number of friends that we say we can count on has decreased. There is a loneliness epidemic in our country. This is not just my opinion. This is even the opinion of our former Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General under President Obama. So these issues are prominent. And Joe, I don't know if I completely answered your question. I think the step one is self-awareness of yourself and your own comfort level, is lending that compassionate ear, is being grateful for what you have, not focusing on what you don't have. Our minds are so acclimated to desire and want. There's nothing wrong with desiring or wanting. But when that overrules the gratitude, and this doesn't necessarily do with any spiritual beliefs, although if you are spiritual, that's great, is remaining that focus and optimism about that. More of a general thing for folks to consider is that, and I'm sure the judges are aware of this, it's called mental health first aid training. This is a movement that grew out of Australia that's present now in the United States, and that has to do with, it's kind of like learning, like the American Red Cross used to teach basic CPR, and so this is mental health first aid training that's designed for lay people to address specifically, Joe, your question about what do you do? Because I can assure you that everyone in this room, whether it's a peer, colleague, a paralegal, somebody at church, you have seen somebody distressed and not sure what to do. And you talk about the economics of things. Yeah, let's set aside the judicial system and how our prisons are full of psychiatrically ill people. Your places of work, your employer groups, people showing up to work late, missing work days, missing deadlines, and things. Very often the reasons these problems are happening is people are dealing with some personal issues that are overwhelming their work. That also comes at a very significant economic burden in our country. And again, what we do as employer groups, unfortunately, is we turn a blind eye to them for a lot of different reasons. Whether it's ADA or whatever, I'm frankly kind of tired of hearing about the excuses as to why we're not helping our co-workers and our people in our own lives. But that also then goes back to stigma, right, is the lack of awareness. I'm not saying that in places of work that we need to go out and diagnose people. That is not the intent. But we do need to create an environment where somebody feels comfortable in seeking help, and those resources are being provided in that place of work for them to be able to access the help that they need.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, sure.
How do we as attorneys reconcile our ethical obligations and conflict of interest and give information and embarking our clients talking to them and recognize that they could be able to or possibly even conflict? How do we reconcile that when you learn it in confidence, you can't go in court and go, well, my client has this mental illness because this, and this. And is there an exception to confidentiality for any of these kind of issues?
I'd probably turn that over to one of the judges.
In the criminal or civil?
I think either.
In criminal, the obligations are interesting. On the criminal side, you can always do an ex parte order that the judge will sign and not, and there's no violation. And you can get your own evaluation of your client and see what's going on. And any party in the criminal case, the judge, prosecutor, or defense lawyer can ask for an evaluation, and there's no ethical issue with that. I think where it may get a little bit more complicated is if they are, say, because we have a system in place on the criminal side, even though diversion's a better alternative to all of that, in my opinion, if you can. But on the civil side, if you have a big case and they're making decisions, and they may not be competent to make those decisions, and you may have to defend or prosecute or adjudicate that case, it can be a lot more challenging. I don't know the answer. We are putting together a CLE on those ethical issues, and we'll talk to some ethicists in the law to figure that out. I will tell you this, the American Bar Association Mental Health Criminal Justice Standards just added a whole new section to those standards, and we do recommend that all lawyers get trained in these issues now, judges, prosecutors, and that we now start to divert these cases as opposed to prosecute these cases. And so the standard's changing nationally. We now have to start to educate lawyers on how to use all that and do all that. But I think we've turned a corner. We just have to now implement these changes. It's a great question, and I'll get your card and I'll get you some information, and I'll get you some better information.
Yes, sir.
I am self-aware that I'm not dressed as an attorney today. Other than that, I'm almost here as a proxy. I have a lot of questions. I can't make them here today. And if this is being recorded, I would suggest that you put it somewhere where other professionals, other than Dr. Raul, would have some input on what they heard and what suggestions they might have to improve the situation. Now, I do have sort of like a question, because this was an issue of the Florida bar that had everything to do with mental illness among attorneys. I don't know what kind of situation Erwin Gonzalez had. I don't know if he's sort of like a case study, but what I do know is that there's a stigma in society as a whole, and I have to think there would be more of a stigma for attorneys if they were to admit that they have a mental problem. Now, other than that, this is the thing that I would address the question to the doctor. Attorneys need to have like an edge when you go to court, especially litigants. I guess attorneys that do other type of transactional work wouldn't go through this. What I found wrong with this journal article was that everything had to do in the context of big firms, like partners helping them out. And honestly, I think that 80% or so of attorneys in Florida are sole practitioners. So they have no help. Now, having said that, and this is the question for the doctor, the psychotropic drugs used, a lot of them affect people, not just attorneys, in different ways. They gain weight, their libido decreases, there's all these other circumstances that obviously at some point they might say, the hell with it. I don't want to take, any type of therapy or any type of medical intervention or anything like that. So basically, it is a very daunting problem by many, many levels. So again, I hope that this is recorded and it's placed out there so that other professionals can tell you that I can see this might help in this way or another. And I guess the last thing, and it's sort of strange, does any of this, does telemedicine help in any way?
Sure. Well, there's, and thank you, sir, for your thoughts and questions and comments. I think they're all very insightful, and so I'll try to remember them as best as I can. Number one, to your point about the situation with the law firms, and the majority are individual law firms, I can assure you that our special committee is very specifically looking at that and trying to develop and formulate those resources for the smaller firms and not just focused on the larger firms. Next, the issue of the concern about psychotropic medications. Yes, just for because the topic of psychotropic medications is something that always, again, related to the topic in general, evokes very strong feelings, especially when we're talking about children. I can just formulate for you my experience, almost nearly 30 years as a practicing physician. I'm a firm believer in the use of psychotropic medications. However, along with the use of psychotropic medications, there needs to be attention that's paid to what I said earlier about the psychosocial treatments that are available as well. This is something that in medicine we have not done the best job, in my mind, that we overlook, where because of a lot of different reasons, the role of a psychiatrist is relegated to writing the prescription, right? You get 8 to 10 minutes and prescriptions written. No, I don't think that's adequate time. And just another fact for people to know of is that the majority of psychiatric care in this country is rendered in the primary care setting. What does that mean? That means that the prescriptions, majority of them, are not written by psychiatrists. They are written by internal medicine, family medicine, pediatricians, OBGYNs. Let me assure you, you do not want me delivering your baby. I haven't delivered a baby in 30 years. But now and this is a complex, we could spend 2 hours on this topic, but we've relegated the psychiatric treatment to non-psychiatric professionals. This is no disrespect to my colleagues. Surgeons and they're great physicians, but they're not qualified to treat these conditions. Did I leave anything out?
Yes, suicide.
Okay.
Attorneys.
Sure.
Why? Because suicide is very strange. There's a period when a person actually appears to be getting better, and suddenly they crash, and when they're crashing is when they commit suicide.
Very often that happens. You're exactly right. That often in treatment, when people are on antidepressant treatment, this is one reason why regular follow-up with a mental health professional is critical, because someone who has been depressed gets placed hypothetically on an antidepressant that's helping elevate their mood. I think this is your point, that they're finally getting enough energy to go ahead and commit an act that they have been thinking about. Very, very much of concern. Again, we alluded to this earlier, the suicide rates among every age demographic to include children are skyrocketing, and especially among professionals, doctors, lawyers, and so again, sorry.
If I may, you also raised another, very valid point, and we talked about it in our bar committee meeting last week, because they were trying to put a video together and to get lawyers to get on and say, yes, I have a mental illness, and they had a bunch lined up, and then when it push came to shove, they didn't want their face shown, they didn't want their name used, and it's understandable. I mean, what client is going to want to hire someone that they think may have a mental health issue? And you do want your edge in court to be very sharp, and if the medication is dulling you a little bit. And so these are really complex issues that we have to start to work through. And we definitely don't want to enhance the stigma, but we definitely want to be able to figure out how we can get lawyers access to good services so they don't lose their edge, they get the treatment that they need. Because remember, recovery rates are great when you get the quality treatment that is, that can be available. And so there's a lot we have to do. Don't give up on us yet, but at least the bar is starting to take on those issues, and we're talking about it, which is a big first step. So thank you.
Another, yes, ma'am.
This question is for Dr. Mehra. I really like the commentary. Oh, thank you. I really like the commentary that you made about cell phones. I myself have been an attorney 13 years, so when I started practicing, cell phones were not a thing, and now they're basically everything. My question to you is about, you were talking about how cell phones ruin mental health by negating meaningful social interactions. How else do cell phones affect mental health?
Sure, good, wonderful question. And that is that, and y'all may have seen these stories on 60 Minutes and other shows, is that when you have former executives at Apple and Google and other places who are really talking about the algorithms that are created for these phones, they're very purposeful and designed to keep us pressing buttons. Well, eventually, it's like anything else. If you stop and think about it, just your vision, your hand movement is a neurological function, right? And guess where the impulse is coming from your brain? Well, these processes are affecting the neurotransmitters of your brain. And so that is what, especially among our youth, when their brains are developing, because it is not until about age 25 that the brain is totally developed. And so think about it, at younger ages, we're already adversely affecting the neurochemicals of the brain. Now, I can't tell you quantitatively or qualitatively exactly what that is, because this is a relatively new phenomenon, but this is how granular these things are getting. There have been several top executives who have left these organizations because the cat is already out of the bag on these things. What we have to do as a society and as a culture, and you as individuals have to do in your families of origin, is to figure out ways to stop that and set some limits on it, because it is out of control.
I'm going to jump in on this one. So I was, I feel like I'm in a confession group. I was in an active My name is Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Joe. Welcome. I quit Facebook 3-4 years ago. I'm going to tell you right now, if anybody has the guts to quit it, best thing I ever did in my life. Like Dr. Mehra says, like the panel alluded to, it's noise, it's chatter, it's not reality. Nothing ever good came from, nobody really cares about my plate of spaghetti and meatballs that I used to post. Nobody cared about my garlic rolls or what I got at CVS. If there is one thing to be said, this is not leaving us. It is not leaving us. That ship has sailed, that ratchet has clicked. But you all have the power today to say no to Facebook, no to LinkedIn, no to social media. And I will assure you, the time you recover may very well be spent with your family, with your real flesh and blood friends, or frankly, with yourself. So yes, I had to jump in on that one, Dr. Mehra. And the algorithms that Dr. Mehra talks about, it's actually to the point now where it's quite creepy when I log onto my own computer and it says, we noticed you bought peanut butter powder and egg whites, there's a sale. I'm like, whoa, okay, I did buy them. Yeah, no, it's funny, you buy egg whites too? Yeah, I know, it's a problem. But the point is that we have the power. We have the power to terminate the relationship with the electronic genie. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. How many more questions? Just show me how many more questions we have. 1, 2, this gentleman. We have 3 more questions, and then we'll wrap up the session. So go ahead, sir.
Yeah, are you seeing a change in mentality or the approach that law firms are having in terms of awareness of stress and what it can do to their own employees? Are they kind of becoming more flexible about that?
Want me to answer that one? Okay, so what I do for a living, my 2 colleagues are here. I am a lawyer who does not practice law. I left Holland & Knight in 1991, largely due to stress. I didn't plan on telling that story, but I think it's important to your point. In 1991, the best you could have gotten was a sympathetic ear with no particular constructive guidance on what to do. The short answer is we've made some micro strides, and this is where I give Ackerman a lot of credit for hosting us today. There is so much more that needs to be done. The law firms, Abby and Jennifer work with me, we talk to thousands of lawyers. We hear and we know that the economics of law firms do not coincide neatly or conveniently with the economics of law practice and mental health. Okay? We value lawyers based on 2 things, your hourly rate and the hours you work, because most of our work is commercial. We're here today, all of you are here today, because we are trying to figure out a way, a better way, to educate the law firms to holistically attack this problem. So the short answer is if I had to grade them today, 1991 we were probably an F. Today we're probably a C-. We've got a long way to go. Judge?
And it's not just law firms. So the American Psychiatric Association Foundation has this workplace program that has exploded over the last 3-4 years. And what they found is, and I may be wrong on the numbers, so don't quote me on this, but I think the work productivity loss in the United States due to mental health is about $40 billion a year. It's either 40 or 80. It's way up there. And what most people do when they're having a mental health issue, they call in and they say they have a back problem. Nobody calls in. And so what I think the law firms need to understand is that they'll actually get more productivity and billable hours if they have healthy employees. And that's what we have to start to show. And there's data to back that up. Because if you're really hurting, you're not going to put in the hours, you're not going to put in the quality of work, and it's going to catch up and hurt them in the long term. And that's part of what we need to explain through what we're doing. This is actually good economics by having good health.
I want to jump in one thing that I said regarding my situation. When I think about it, it wasn't my firm's fault, okay? Holland & Knight was a supportive environment for me. The problem was I didn't have the courage because of stigma to talk openly about it with management. My partner was a wonderful fellow. We're still friends today. We peripherally talked about it a little bit, but it wasn't the firm's fault because I, because of stigma, was afraid to confront the issue with management. And I'm willing to bet that if I had approached it, I think I would have gotten a positive response. So in fairness, I think it is incumbent on us to also have the courage to realize there's nothing abnormal about not feeling great. There's nothing abnormal about that. So to that extent, I wish I had had the confidence to have addressed it. And I've told the committee, and we know, I'm 53. At 28, I didn't have the same perspective I have at 53. It's a lot easier to talk about it at 53 than 28. So I wanted to just be clear and clarify that point.
And it's not just private firms or solo practitioners. We were talking about assistant state attorneys. You're in a homicide division, you get sent to a horrific murder scene. Talk about trauma and getting overdosed with cortisol. They're the largest law firm in Miami. And nothing is done to prepare those kids, basically, that are walking into these horrible situations, to then debrief them and get them treated after they deal with that kind of situation. And so we really have to rethink this whole thing.
We had, gentleman had a question there.
Try to be as artful as I can. This question is about access. I know we talked about it just briefly, and the comment I heard was that, with certain networks, most networks, the number of mental health professionals is decreasing, which lends the question, how to gain access to treatment. In other words, if you have someone that you are aware that is in need of treatment, and, beyond being empathetic and stepping outside yourself, there's only so much you can do. If that person needs help, where do you tell them to go? Because absent going on a website of, and shooting darts of who might be competent and who might not be, I'm at a loss what to tell these people.
Well, you hire Mehra Vista Health. So that's, seriously, is that there's a concept you should all be aware of, and I'm confident you know it at some level. They're called employee assistance programs, and this is one of the things that our organization does. What has happened with these things over time is that they really have become commoditized, such that, as an employer or as the HR person or as the decision maker in a law firm, these products are embedded in life insurance and other things, and they really don't get any play at all. They don't get any promotion for a multitude of different reasons. But if there is a good one and the right one, that can be a resource where you are able to call them 24/7 and get that direction from a clinician who knows the language on what to do based on that situation. This is something that our organization deals with 24/7, and I know we're being recorded, and I have no shame in saying this. We actually get calls from insurance executives, insurance company leadership who calls us for help, who are unable to figure out where to go for themselves or their family members. And I wish that was not the case.
So there's two really important points that the doctor just pointed out. One is, and you gave me an idea actually as I'm sitting here for the bar, but one is, if you are in a big firm, you should talk to your HR people, and the American Psychiatric Association Foundation can actually help you with this, is getting the right package in your firm for mental health treatment, and that would help a lot in the private sector. The second part is we need to put a lot more pressure on the insurance industry. There's laws on the books that talk about parity, they're a joke. And the insurance industry has to start to step up and offer in your regular policy better coverage so you could get more competent and better care. They're just not doing it.
In my experience, many of these policies have access, but the problem is you have no idea the people on the list and what they're spending.
Right.
You just have no way of knowing and going to Yelp.
Right. Right. You can't get a good rating on a psychiatrist these days.
So unless you're in the industry, so you have a limited number, which tells me maybe not the best and most competent professionals are in that network or on the network. And then if you do conclude that and you do find someone outside the network, well, there's a whole entire new stressor of having to pay $400 a session.
That's right.
So that to me is the biggest problem. To me, unless you give people a phone number to call or access to somebody who can help them, then the discussion of theory is...
Yeah, I think we still have to start with the access you know, it's like when we started our program, I didn't even think about competency. I just wanted people to get help. And now I'm at the competency level, which is great. I mean, but they evolve. But first we have to get you access. And I wonder if it's something we could talk to the bar. I mean, they do insurance programs, and maybe what we can get them to do is put together a good mental health insurance program that solo practitioners could get access to and pay into at a decent rate, and then help with the quality and competency of the network to make sure that we're helping our field really get the level they need. And I don't know why, we should talk about that, because I think that's something that we could do that would make a huge impact. And then it's kind of private, then you're dealing with your own network, and you know, you don't feel you have to be so open and out about some of these issues if you're...
It's certainly a legitimate
So thank you for triggering some thought there, but and we can talk to the APAF about helping us with that.
And we'll have one more question, sir, because we're 15 minutes over schedule.
Whoops.
So thank you for everybody's patience.
Has court.
And Nushin has court.
Okay, the Florida Bar until like, I guess, 10 years ago, posted disciplinary actions against attorneys. Before that, they didn't post anything. And I find it curious that whatever an attorney might do and whatever incident might happen in court is going to appear as a disciplinary action. So my suggestion is that maybe they should look into eliminating that, because, again, getting back to having an edge, I had attorneys in court say he has a disciplinary action, and it's to ingratiate themselves with the judge. As if you know, let's go by legal arguments alone. But no, they get to personal attacks. So that should be something that should be looked into. I would go back to not posting anything.
It's not just that. We are talking about these related issues. How about admissions to the bar? Have you seen a therapist? Who in the heck wants to check yes on that box? I mean, is the bar going to hold you up or deny you access to the profession? And in the old days, they did it almost automatically.
Which that's one of the things our committee is dealing
And
with.
ours too. And so this is part of that discussion. We're not going to have a good answer tomorrow, but at least we're starting to have that discussion, and you're absolutely correct.
Yes, and thank you. So I want to please give a real round of applause to our panel. It's an understatement to say thank you to each of you. It's a privilege and honor to serve with all of you on our committee. I have a handout. And so, you know, please make sure you get it. It has valuable information. And just thank you all for attending. Thank you so much.
Please start.